again, welcome, Errol.
Thank you, Francine.
It's great to have you. Okay. Thank you for coming on the Real Mafia Mom, a place where women, single mothers raising boys, will learn how to connect with their sons. So, of course, for those who are watching, I've known Errol for, should I say, how many years? I'm sure it's over 20 years, Errol, that we've known each other, maybe more.
Yes.
Yes, and your mother, Mother Holmes, when I got divorced and found myself with, two under two, as they would say, two boys under 2 years old, she reached out to me, and I will never forget that. She was always checking on me. How are you doing? She was always offering advice, and how to get those little boys to shape up, and just assuring me that don't worry, it will all work out in God's time. And so I wanted to honor her today, and I'm hoping that your story will help to motivate other mothers, who are raising boys on their own, who came out of an abusive situation, and to look at you as that son, who you are now, how you're doing, a family man yourself, raising two boys, and just encourage us. So introduce yourself, Errol. What are you up to these days?
Well, first of all, may I just say thank you so much for the invitation to join you on the Real Mafia Mom, this Let's Talk program. My mother has been an inspiration in my own life, and I could not be where I am but for her, because I grew up in an abusive home, and my father caused me to want to try to commit suicide 3 times before I reached the age of 14. So were it not for my mother, I would not have survived. I would not have become the man I have become, the husband and the father, the friend, the employer, the Christian. So I'm happy for this opportunity to honor her. She died on April 15, 2019, and that is it's still a big loss, but she has taught me well, and so we move on. So in a nutshell, my name is Errol Holmes. I've been in love with my girlfriend now, my wife, Paula, for the last 34 years. We've been married for 27. We have 2 boys, Tarek and Philip. I am a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an HR professional, have been an HR professional now for 34 years, and more recently, a project management specialist and the general manager of the National Housing Trust. And for those of you who are in virtual land, the National Housing Trust is the housing agency of Jamaica that provides housing solutions for the nation, for Jamaicans at home and abroad. And so that's what I do. So in a nutshell, that's me.
Okay, thank you, Errol. And let me get a little personal. How are the boys doing? I see Tarek is doing, well, they're both just doing great, I'm so proud of them. How are they doing now? Are they all both here now?
Yes, so Tarek is back at home. And again, for your viewers and listeners around the world, we're very proud of Tarek. He is 26 years old, and he came just 1 year into our marriage.
Oh, wow.
And he is the first Jamaican to be accepted into the prestigious New York Film Academy, where he did his master's degree in acting for film. And so he writes movies, he is a singer, producer. He is presently writing a television series for a local media house. And he came home after the COVID, after Jamaica opened its borders. So he's been back home now since June. Philip is a second-year forensic science major at the University of the West Indies and plans to do it all the way to the PhD. So both boys, one is a scientist, one is an artist, both are singers, both are great young men. And we're trying to make sure that 2 young women somewhere in the world are will find good husbands. And so that's what we are seeking to do, to give the world 2 good husbands.
That's wonderful. You hear, ladies? So get the daughters ready. So Errol, as you said earlier, you grew up in an abusive household, and I've heard some bits and pieces of your story. And even from Mom Holmes, she shared a little with me also of what that was like. So tell me a little bit about growing up in that kind of environment.
Well, my earliest recollections were Mom. My most profound recollections are Mom. My dearest recollections are Mom. But filtered in among those recollections has been my father. I believe it was around 10 or 11. I asked Mom if I had a father. And she said yes. And she told me that he existed and that he lived in Jamaica. But at this time, when I asked her, we were in the Bahamas. My mother was asked by our Adventist church to be a missionary to the Bahamas, where she was a teacher for many years. She asked to be transferred to the Bahamas from Jamaica because of her abusive marriage. And so the church, in seeking to protect and honor her and to make sure that she could still be of value and psychologically take her from this very codependent and abusive relationship, contacted our church headquarters in the Bahamas and asked them to create a space for Mom. And Mom went to the Bahamas, and then a few years later, she took myself, and then a few years later, she took my brother. So we all grew up in the Bahamas from as early as 5 years old. And I would go to school and I would see, mother and father. I would go to church and I would see mother and father. But Mommy was mother and father. I just never thought of it until one day at 10 years old, a gentleman from our church in the Bahamas came by to visit. He came to bring something from Mom. And I just went to him, Francine, and took off his shoes and started to clean his shoes. I didn't know why I was doing it, but I just cleaned I cleaned it until it was, you could see your face. I had no military training. I just did it. And Mommy asked me why I did it. And I told her I didn't know. I just liked the gentleman. But she began to notice that any time men came around, I would want to clean their shoes. And so she started to realize that there was a yearning inside of me for a father, some male presence. She was a school teacher.
Right.
She was a wise woman. She didn't chastise, she didn't question. But I started to notice that more men would come by our home, and we would go out more to dinner, and Mom would always make sure that we were going out with a family where a man was present. And she said she began to notice that I always was leaning towards talking with the men, staying with the man or men. And she began to realize that I needed male guidance and good, healthy male company. So every Sunday or so, one of the gentlemen from church would just come and offer to give my brother and me a ride out into the countryside in the Bahamas. And she always chose men who were godly men. And I gravitated toward that. I remember my first driving experience was a deacon at our church who came by a Sunday afternoon and said, "Come, let me teach you to drive." And he put me in his lap and I started to steer the wheel. And that stayed with me until I got to the point where I taught my 2 sons to drive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Mommy realized that I needed this kind of presence. And so she deliberately made it happen. At church, at Pathfinders, and for those of your audience who are not Seventh-day Adventists, we have a group of, we have a young people's program called Pathfinders, which is similar to the Scouts, where on a Sunday afternoon afternoon, they go and they learn the various things about the galaxies. They learn how to tie knots. They go into the bushes. They learn how to survive in the bushes. We have camp on a Sunday, on a weekend. We learn to survive in nature. And that was a major part of my growing up. So mommy did everything possible to provide male presence when she began to realize at 10 years old that I started to ask these questions. The Bahamas was a nice experience. I call it really my first home. So there was no issue and there was no abuse in the Bahamas. It was mostly the longingness for a father. But mom was everything to us. So it really didn't hit Francine until one day at about age 13, mommy said to my brother and me, "What do you think about me going back to your father?" We said, "What? What do you mean going back to our father?" Marcus, she had never said anything negative about him, and she never really spoke about him until I started to ask at age 10. So she told me this story that they had gotten married and they had had some problems. That's all she said. So she came to the Bahamas, but he has now found her in the Bahamas and has asked her to come back. So we said, well, if you want to go back, fine. I mean, as long as you're happy. We don't know this gentleman, but if you're happy, then fine. So he came to the Bahamas and we met him. Now, Francine, this was interesting because between 10 and 13, when was 13 was the first time I saw him. So between 10 and 13, remember now I told you how I started asking about my father. Mommy started to realize that I had this wanting to get male presence. So she had started to have men come around and have me go to homes where we had good male friendship. So by the time my father came into my life at 13, I was, shall we say, prepared for a father, because between 10 and 13, this thing had started. So when he came, I just ran to him. I mean, it's my father. Whatever the stories were, I didn't know, I didn't care. My father was coming. And it was like Santa Claus. He came for the weekend in the Bahamas. Mom was happy. My dream had come true that I had a father and we were living in heaven. We came back to Jamaica soon thereafter, and that's when it started. That gentleman who was Santa Claus in the Bahamas, who made us feel as if we had gone to heaven, the minute we landed in Jamaica, it was like turning a switch off.
He became compass.
I can't describe it. I can only tell you that he was, oh goodness. We came back, I was 13 years old, and between 13 and age 14, I tried to commit suicide 3 times.
Wow.
He abused my mother. My brother is an asthmatic, so he never hit my brother. He just deprived us of anything. I mean, I'll tell you how the abuse was. So on a Sunday afternoon, we'd be having dinner. And my father would come to the dinner table and he would notice I say the word notice because who notices these things? He would notice that there were 2 dumplings in my plate and 2 dumplings in his plate. And somehow the dumplings in his plate were smaller than the dumplings in my plate. He accused my mother of putting me over him. And that resulted in me getting a beating. Me. I didn't share with the food, you know. And I wish I knew what you were going to ask, because I would have brought you what I would call a representation. I'm looking around to see if there's anything I can find. So I can't, so let me use words. For you and your audience, just try to think about especially for those who live in Jamaica and in the Caribbean, think about our street electrical poles. And you know, in the US, electrical poles have the wires on the ground. In the Caribbean, in Jamaica, we have them above ground on electrical poles. The wires on the
Right.
electrical poles roughly are about the thickness of your finger.
Yeah.
My father would beat me with those wires.
Oh, wow.
And what was my crime?
Wow.
Having a dumpling in my plate that was larger than his. And when he beat me, Francine, it wasn't just a
I can imagine.
He took the wire and he flashed it. I mean, it is only because I'm dark now and I've gotten older and my body is healed. But my back was rippled with wounds because
Wow.
I had a dumpling that was larger than his. Let me give you another example.
Man.
Because it was just two of us, my brother and me and mom, I was the man in the family. So every night before we went to bed, it was Errol's job to check the doors, check the windows, make sure the house was safe.
Right.
This is what I was doing from I was 10 years old. It is what I am doing now at 60 years old. I'm 61 this year. And every evening before I go to bed, it's what I do. I train the boys to do it. You're going to have your own home. You check the windows. You turn off the lights. You make sure your house is safe before you go to bed. So when I came home to Jamaica, I continued to do this because it is my way of protecting my mother. Instead of my father recognizing that I was innocently just being the man, taking care of mommy, making sure the place is safe, he would beat me for checking the house and ask me if I thought that I was a bigger man than he was. He never sat me down and commended me for these things. He would abuse me for doing them. So you would then ask the question, so where is mommy in all of this? Mommy sought to talk to him. She started to share with him. She tried to tell him how she had grown us, why we do these things, and he would turn on her. And it became a confusing space. I could not love my mother the way that I always did. My father took it that I was now seeking to replace him. The idiot of this man felt that somehow his 13-year-old son had now replaced him. And if he couldn't abuse me enough, he would then abuse my brother and he would abuse my mother. One afternoon, I went to the dining table and my father just took up my food, threw it on the ground and told me to eat it from the ground because the plate that my mother had put my food in, according to him, was prettier than the plate that she gave him his food.
Oh my goodness. But Errol, this is someone that's mentally ill though. You realize that? Looking back, you realize that this is a mentally ill person.
Francine, you call him mentally ill? My father was not mentally ill. We use this word mentally ill as an excuse because we don't want to indicate what it. Hold on, Robert. I understand.
Set me straight.
I understand that there are men who exhibit aberrant behavior. They are not in control of their faculties, and they do things because they have a disturbed mind. I know that. I get that. And there's a whole profession and discipline and therapy for that.
Right.
That wasn't my father. My father was demonized. My father was just wicked and bad. My father was not sick. My father was evil. My father was a deacon in the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Oh, wow.
My
Yeah.
father would preach. My father spoke much more eloquently than I ever could. My father was tall, dark, and handsome. My
Mm.
father was a good-looking black man. There was nothing
Mm.
sick about my father. My father was just evil. And he painted this picture of being this wonderful man. So we would go to church on Sabbath, and the family would sit down, and we couldn't
Mhm.
move. We just had to behave like everything was, because when church was over, that wonderful deacon became a tyrant. Let me tell you how difficult it was. And I'm not exaggerating, Francine. For your listeners to try to understand this, we had 3 dogs in our home at 69 Weymouth Drive in Washington Gardens, which is a suburban area here in Kingston, Jamaica. When my father came in from work in the evening, the 3 dogs went around the back and never came out again until the morning when he went to work.
Wow.
That was his impact on the animals in our home.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the 3 human beings who lived in there, Mom, me, and my brother Wayne. To cut a long story short, my mother, who loved my father to her dying day, left him lock, stock, and barrel 3 times in order to save us,
Yeah.
and went back 3 times because of love. And it got so bad, Francine, it got so bad, ladies and gentlemen and listeners, that there was a time in my young life when I hated my mother.
I can imagine. Mm-hmm.
And when I say hate, I want you to take that to its nth degree. There were 2 years when I did not speak to my mother. I blamed her for what happened, and I told her that if we died, she was the cause, because instead of going to the police and protecting us, she kept us in that abusive situation while she was trying to change him.
Mm-hmm.
And when I told my mother that I would never speak to her again when I was 15 years old, she got the message and she took me away by night and sent me to live with a family friend until I was able to go to college in order to save my life.
Wow. I remember you sharing a story once when your dad threw you through a window. Was it something like that? I don't remember. That story stuck in my mind for a very long time.
My father did many things to me.
Wow.
And I want your listeners to know that it's not like today when boys are rude and disobedient and loud and aggressive, and a boy like that could live with my father because daddy would kill him. We didn't have the luxury of being rude.
Exactly.
We didn't have the luxury of being rude because he would kill us.
Exactly. Wow.
So oh goodness. So one evening, Francine, I saw my father at the house of a woman. And I had been hearing that he was having women with my mother. And I told mommy, because I kept nothing from my mother. I mean, we are so.
Yeah,
And
I know.
when I told mommy what I saw and where I saw him, of course, when he came home, she confronted him with it. And when he asked her, where did she get it? She says, Errol saw you. And he told me.
Oh, mercy.
Francine, my father went for the wire. My father told me that my skin was too smooth. And my mother had been spoiling me all these years in the Bahamas. And if I thought that I was going to have the opportunity to become a father like him, forget it. he was going to end my ability that night to ever have children. My father then took the wire and he beat me to a pulp. The entire living room was just bloodied. I was too weak. I couldn't run from him. He was a huge man. And when he beat me and he beat me and he beat me, and my mother is screaming and my brother is screaming and my brother is having asthma because he cannot stand what is going on. And he fling my mother down and blood is all over the place. My father then took me up by my shoulders. He was a huge fella. He lifted my bleeding body off the ground. He took his knee and drove it into my scrotum. And in doing so, he was going to burst my testicles. He didn't say it in as delicately as I am saying it to you. But he took it,
imagine, yeah.
He drove it into my scrotum and told me what was going to happen to my testicles and that he wanted to see them come out through my mouth.
Oh.
And I dropped in a heap, unconscious. Mark you, Francine, I am his son. I am not a bastard. I am not an adopted child. I am his firstborn. All I can tell you is, I woke up in the hospital, looking at my mother's face, crying. And listen to me, Francine. When my mother realized that I was conscious and could understand her, my mother whispered to me, "It's okay, Errol. Forgive him and love him anyway."
Oh.
I will not tell you what I thought of my mother that evening.
I can imagine.
And I will not tell you what I told God. I am only happy that God does not keep a record of our wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he were to press rewind on the video of my life at that point, the things that I said to him would not come anywhere. The things that I said to him would make Peter's, the Apostle Peter, before he became the Apostle Peter, it would make his language sound diplomatic when he was on the seashore. All in all, Francine, throughout all of that, my mother's consistent love and care for me helped me later on in life, not then, to understand what love meant, and then to understand what tough love looked like. Because she had to make a decision that in order to save her life and her son's life, it was time to move on. She did that. We rebonded, and I had this wonderful opportunity of caring for her for the last 20 years of her life before she died. And I am indeed blessed.
Wow. Errol, what a story. I mean, I've heard bits and pieces, but not like this. You lived a hell of a... So therefore, you had no childhood then. Well, maybe for the few years you were in Bahamas.
Yes.
But outside of that, where was your childhood?
So you're right. My fondest memories of childhoodness was in the Bahamas between 5 and 13 years old when we came back to Jamaica. It was hell between 13 and 17 when I went to college. Between 17 and 60 was when my life started again. And Mom and I healed. And we bonded yet again because Daddy was out of our lives after that. Mommy left him.
Right. So let me ask you this now. So he's out of the picture and you're bonding with your mom again. How did she help you? Did she help you, first of all? Did she help you to heal? And if she did, how did she go about that?
So I have never doubted my mother's love for me. If there's one thing that I would swear on, if there was one thing I was assured of, if there was one thing I was most certain, it was my mother's love for me. Those hellish years between 13 and 17, she was seeking to balance her love for her husband and her love for her children. She never wanted to have to make the choice. But when she was forced to do so, happily she did. But she gave him every opportunity to repent, to relent, and to change. During all of this time, Francine, she kept pointing us to Jesus. She kept pointing us to, how do I describe this? The best representation I can think of is looking at the life of Martin Luther King when he was seeking to bring consciousness to America about the injustice of seeing Black people as less than human and treating them as scum and suffering the indignity of being spat upon and ridiculed and all of those things. Mommy lived that in our home and sought to teach my brother and me that love is more powerful than anger and violence. And when she realized that there was nothing further she could do, she then recognized that her primary responsibility, given the choices that she had, was to best parent her two boys in a non-abusive environment. And if it meant tearing up her heart and moving away to protect them, she would. And that's what she did.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Errol. You know, I've watched you with your boys, and there was a joke that the only thing Paula did was carry them for 9 months. And if you could have birthed them yourself, you would have.
Oh, yes. No doubt. No doubt. Up to this day, I told the boys that I breastfed them.
Right? So what made you not continue the trauma that you experienced? And you, both you and Wayne, how it is that you got to the point where you realized that you cannot continue this, and you didn't? Did you seek professional help at any time? You know, how did that? Because that's one of the things we see. Trauma is passed down from generation to generation. And it's based on what people are saying, it's like it's the hardest thing to break. How were you able to break it so that you could be the type of father you are to your sons?
If it were not for mommy bringing that balance in my home, it would be easy for me to perpetuate the circumstances to which I was exposed between 13 and 17. Mom continued to be that other voice. There was a time, Francine, when I had a problem as a young Christian. And this drove me to my first suicide attempt, because my mother's God was different, diametrically opposed from my father's God. They both went to the same church. One was a deacon, one was on the choir. They both espoused Christianity. But the two gods were diametrically opposed. One was loving and kind and sympathetic and sensitive and used love as a tool to teach. One was violent, abusive, selfish, used bad words, was immoral, and stole our youth. And as a young boy, I began to hate my mother's God. Because my mother's God was soft and weak and permissive and allowed bad things to happen to innocent boys. So I hated my mother's God. And it drove me to begin to hate my mother. Because my father's God was taking the precedence in our home. Right. And bringing fear in our lives. When my father came home in the evenings, our heart went into our mouths. But mommy was wise. With all of her, I don't even know if I want to call it poor judgment. She made a decision to stay and try to work with my father. So I'm not blaming her for that. But when she began to realize that the thing was getting to me and my brother, Francine, she decided to send us to stay with other persons. And she created an environment where we were more out of the house than in the house. And when we were in the house, she would seek to protect us, while always seeking to demonstrate what a loving wife and what a protective mother should look like. And then when she couldn't do it anymore, she sent us away. And while she sent us away, she never stayed away. And I'm now realizing that for the couple of years that we lived away from her, with friends and relatives down the road, she always came. She picked us up. We all were at the same school. She was a principal of the school. And we always realized that she couldn't do anything to stop this man because he was bigger and stronger than her for as long as she chose to stay in the home. So she left him, as I said, on 3 different occasions and said, no, I have to protect my children. And so you, to answer your question directly, I began to see how a man should not treat a woman. And I resolved in my mind that if God ever gave me a wife, I would stop the abuse on my watch. Secondly, the childhood of which I was deprived, I wanted to make sure that if God ever gave me children, they would have what I did not have. And he gave me 2 boys. And I will tell you something here now, Francine, and this might appear to be funny to your listeners. But when Darling and I got pregnant and we had our first child, we went to Lama's classes, and I'm a doting husband and whatever, learned all the things. I delivered, I was there in the delivery room and helped Tarek to come into this world. And I remember looking up into Paula, because remember I was a part of the delivery. Right. Looking up into Paula after the placenta came out, seriously now, Francine, looking up, expecting, I'm expecting to see Emmanuel come out of her. And it might appear funny, but I did not know, Francine, how to parent
Right.
a boy because I
Mhm.
had one bad experience. So I kept looking for some instructions. We got pregnant again, and Philip came. And again, I'm looking for instructions. Seriously. And I will never forget, I heard a voice say to me after our second delivery, there is no book. I am the book. Learn from me. And one day, I'm going to suggest to you that you have a program where you interview sons brought up by their father and mother, but sons. Have a program with boys and interview my
Right.
boys and ask them how did they feel. I don't need to be on the program.
Mhm.
How did they feel about being parented by me? Because what I sought to do, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination,
Right.
but I wanted to make sure that they saw me as the God who I represent,
Mhm.
as the man who they should become, as the husband who loved their mother, as a sensitive man who cries, as a man who makes mistakes but seeks forgiveness, as a man who is both soft, romantic, firm, and decisive at the same time. They must get what I didn't get. And I got it from simply observing
Right.
mommy and learning from God.
Do you think any of the families that you stayed with or the men that were in your life, especially in the Bahamas, influenced that in any way? Were you able to see a good example from any of these families? You think any of those influenced you in any way?
Oh, indeed. I'm now that you ask a question, I'm going back into my mind. I always seem to gravitate towards men who
Mhm.
had good relationship with their boys without even realizing what I would be facing when I came to Jamaica.
Wow. Well, let me tell you, I can tell you what you have done without any external help, professional help, is no less than a miracle. Because I've seen it so many times where the trauma continues from generation to generation to generation. For you to make a conscious decision that it stops here for both you and Wade to make that conscious decision. Hats off to you, and of course, God be praised. And your mother, because I'm
Mommy,
sure all of
mommy,
that,
mommy,
you know,
that woman,
yeah.
I tell you, and she has lived with us up to the time she died. And I mean, the boys have had the wonderful opportunity of growing up in her arms.
Mm,
They they love their grandmother. She's been gone now since 2019, and we talk about her up to Friday night in worship.
mhm.
She's an indelible part of our lives. Always will be.
Yeah, I can tell you, she was an amazing woman. I'll never forget her. And I understand when you talk about that loving aspect of her. That is something I felt. It was real. That was not fake. So you are blessed to have her as your mother. So before we'll have about 10 minutes left, and you know the audience that you're speaking to. What would you tell women who, well, one, who are in the type of situation, whether as bad as yours were or not so bad, or they have left that situation and are now alone raising these young men? what advice you would give them to help them to, because we hear all the bad things that, when a woman alone is raising boys, all these awful things that's going to happen to them because they didn't have their father in their life. What is your advice to us on raising our boys to break the curse or the cycle or whatever it is, the trauma that was passed down?
So you presented two scenarios, and let me quickly just seek to address them as I'm impressed. One, if you are in an abusive marriage and your spouse is abusing your children, as hard as it takes for me to say this, I think you should leave.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I agree.
An abusive man has lost his sense of judgment and will do things that are horrific and could negatively affect you and your children for life and leave you scarred. And make no mistake about it, Francine, I may appear to be adjusted. God has blessed me and I've done well in life, but I still struggle with some of my own devils. And I have to every day put that before God to keep me into being the kind of godly man that he wants me to be. So while I'm not going to judge or blame mommy for how long she took before she left, I would say to a wife, if you see these consistent things and your children are being physically and mentally abused, I think you ought to protect yourself and your children and leave. Having tried your best, of course.
Agreed.
So that's my first thing. In the second scenario now, having left, one of the things that mommy did, Francine, for me, was to find every healthy way to put me in touch and in company with godly men. Life is a little bit different now because child molestation and abuses of that nature are rampant and you have to be very careful. So you want to keep your eyes open for your children, especially if they're boys, and girls as well. But mommy used every healthy opportunity to put me in the context of godly men and to learn to grow. So Pathfinder Club, Scouts associations, church activities, camping outings, beach trips, family occasions, to put you in access. Secondly, a single mother must be very diligent in training her boys to be men. Now, listen to me carefully. I don't think a woman is best suited to train a boy into being a man. And that's why God gave us husband and wife. I mean, how does a mother teach a boy to weep? It's a difficult thing. Anatomically, you're created.
I did it.
Pardon?
I did it.
Yeah, I know, but anatomically, you're built differently. And if you're going to model, it's a challenge. Mommy did it too. You have done it and many others will. What I'm seeking to say though is, as much as is possible, try to make sure that you give them good male exposure and then also train them to be responsible young men. So they must make their beds, they must learn to cook, they must learn to iron, they must have responsibilities to clean up the yard, they must take out the garbage, not you. They must do the manly things around the house and learn to fix things. They must screw out the bulb. They must, all the little things. They must pick up the leaves. They must roll the wheelbarrow. They must rake up the yard. They must cut the lawn. They must come inside and learn to clean the house and sweep the place and fold up the clothes. They must learn to, you must teach them to be balanced.
Agreed.
And then finally, and I can't say this too much, every mother in your circumstances and in mine meaning you have a balanced family, mother and father, but if you have one where it's only a father or there's a mother, you cannot, in my view, healthily train a boy or a girl to become who they are outside of the spiritual context of what God intended. Find a healthy church family. Find a healthy spiritual father or mother. Find a good, godly old person and share and expose your children to those influences, because it really still takes a village to train.
Yeah. Yes. Very much so. Boy, Errol. Whew. That was a mouthful. And I thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. And I know for a lot, hearing your story will help us to understand and make better decisions. Well, I hope so. And again, I look at, I must really bring them on so people can see. I look at your boys and I think you did an awesome job. We're not keeping Paul out of it, because of course she's coming.
Yes.
Nothing can be done without mother. Yes. But why I'm, talking about you, because of your past. And we have seen so often that someone that had that kind of past, what they end up doing is repeating it. But you did the total opposite. You made a total 180 degree. And that's just awesome. And you, for that, because of that, you have now brought 2 healthy young men into this world. Not men that we're going to have to be scared of, but men who are contributing to our society, who are well adjusted, etc. And from what we heard, successful. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you for sharing, such intimate and personal details of your life. And I know it will definitely help someone. So say hi to the family for me. Tell Paul, who you whispering to? Tell him to come.
No, I wanted the boys to come so you could just get a glimpse of them.
Yes.
The boys are coming.
Oh, great.
So you'll get a chance to see these 2 good-looking men that God has given me. And they take 2 good kids. Yes, so this is Philip. And this is Tara. Better.
Hey, so Tara, Philip, you remember me? Because it's been a while.
I do. The face is familiar. The name's not in my head, but you.
Okay.
Auntie Francine Blackwood.
Right. But Tarek knows me.
Yes, Auntie Fran. Hi.
I was going to say, you better not forget me.
Not at all.
Great to see you guys.
And one of the things that we've done, Francine, I have not hidden from them my story. They both know my story, and so they have an opportunity to make sure that as they go in life, they can be guided by that story and make the right decisions for themselves as well. So everything I've told you, they know.
Yeah. And and that's something too I try to share with mothers, is that always be honest with your children.
Yeah.
Make it age appropriate. So if they're very young, say it in a way that it won't traumatize them. But as they get older, share more, let them understand, because I do believe it's one of the ways of breaking the cycle, of breaking the trauma.
Yes.
Guys, you look great, and all the successes with what you're pursuing. Tariq, I can't wait to see a show on Netflix. I'm speaking it into being.
Very soon, very soon.
Yes, this is the producer and actor, and this is the scientist.
Right? And You know, you're going for my dream job. I've always wanted to be a forensic scientist, you know. I love it. Yes.
I watch shows about it, so we kind of even each other out.
Oh, well, you know, funny, it's the same thing here, Errol. I
Yeah,
have the scientist and I have the creative one who takes more after me. So
yeah,
yeah, there always seem to be night and day.
yeah. Thank you.
All right. So say hi to Paula and thank you again. This has been an eye-opening discussion, and I know it will help someone.
God bless you.
Thank you, Errol.
Bye bye.